Back to one of our top stories. Welcome back. Former Angolan President José Eduardo dos Santos has passed away at the age of 79. Following a long illness, dos Santos was being treated at a hospital in Spain after suffering a cardiac arrest in June. For more on this, we're joined by Professor Bheki Mngomezulu from the Political Science Department at the University of the Western Cape. Professor, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. We learnt of this passing. We know that he was once one of Africa's longest-serving rulers who during almost 4 decades as president of Angola fought the continent's longest civil war. Let's perhaps reflect on his political career.
No, thank you very much, my sister, for having me, and good evening to your viewers. Yeah, first of all, let us send our deepest condolences to the people of Angola. As you recall that the government of Angola assisted a number of African countries in their liberation struggle, including ours in the form of MK and also APLA, and then of course what was Southwest Africa or Namibia and many other African countries. So we send our condolences there. Of course, starting with the question you just asked, it's true that President dos Santos ran or led Angola for 38 years because he started leading that country in 1979 and only left office in 2017. And there are people who are of the view that, in fact, it was not right for him to have stayed in office for that long. But some in Angola will argue differently and say the constitution allowed him to do so. And you might have seen something similar across the African continent. So it means that for as long as the constitution allows you to stay in office, you are in fact in a position to do so. But what is commendable about dos Santos is that in 2017, he could still have stayed in office for a much longer period, but he voluntarily stepped aside and then, of course, handpicked someone, Lorenzo, who was going to be his successor. And unfortunately then, things did not go well for him because his successor started now investigating his kids, more especially Isabel and also President dos Santos' son, saying that they were involved in corrupt activities. But the long and short of it is that President dos Santos led Angola for 38 years, and some will look at him positively, others will focus on the negative side.
Yeah, because in a statement on the announcement of his passing, it was said that dos Santos was a statesman of great historical scale who governed the Angolan nation through very difficult times. And his supporters praised him for perhaps his ability to adapt to changing circumstances, but his critics called him unscrupulous.
Maybe let's start on the positive side. The reality is that President dos Santos did something unthinkable. And in fact, if you compare him with some of our African leaders, he would in fact emerge at the top. One of the things that he did, you recall that Angola got independence from Portugal in 1975, and then Jonas Savimbi in fact gave the Angolan government a hard time. And it's no secret that Jonas Savimbi and his UNITA were in fact supported by America. And then you had the MPLA, which was the party that dos Santos belonged to. And then after negotiations, dos Santos is one of the people who welcomed those who were on the opposite side. In fact, he gave them political positions, he also gave them land, and he also gave them business opportunities. And that is something that most African leaders don't do. So that is on the positive side. And also he's credited for having united Angola in fact, under very trying conditions. But those who look on the negative side, they cite corruption and nepotism, and then they say that those are the things that discredited him. But maybe the point that I would like to mention here is that President dos Santos had humble beginnings. First of all, his parents were not from Angola. They were from Sao Tome. And then when he became president, following the demise of the first president of Angola, NATO, then they elected him not because he was the strongest candidate, but because he was deemed the weakest candidate. They assumed that when they appointed him to be the leader of MPLA and then subsequently the president of the country, he was not going to cause them havoc in the same manner that Kanu did in Kenya with Arab Moi. they elected him not because he was the strongest, but because he was deemed the weakest. Unfortunately for them then, some of the things that they expected him to do, he didn't do. And therefore, that is why you get these two sides of the same person. In fact, in the English language, they would say he was a round character. So at one point, he was a messiah. On the other side, then they would say he was the devil himself, especially those who hated him for the role he played, especially in supporting the liberation struggle, because Americans hated him with a passion, and then Africans liked him with all they had. So it just depends on the side that you want to emphasize. The reality is that he did all.
Yeah, because as you try and assess this round personality in public, he was unassuming and said to even appear shy at times, but a shrewd operator behind the scenes.
Indeed, indeed. It's just like we've been saying with the Zimbabwean president, Mnangagwa, saying that he got this nickname, the crocodile, because he doesn't talk much, but then when it's time to act, then he acts swiftly. And we would say the same with our deputy president. He doesn't talk much, but when he wants to act, he does act. So in the case of President Dos Santos, in fact, history will tell you that when he made his acceptance speech, he broke a record because he only presented that speech for only 1 minute, 54 seconds, and that was it. During his reign, he said that he didn't want to talk to the media that long. So whenever you secured an interview with him, you would count yourself among the luckiest, and you would keep that interview as short as humanly possible, because he was, as you have just pointed out, he was a shy person, and he didn't want to talk much. But when it was time for him to act, he could act decisively. For example, one of his Secretary Generals of the MPLA showed ambitions of replacing him, and then Dos Santos did not like that. And in fact, he reacted by demoting him so that he would then diminish his chances of becoming the president. And of course, that the Secretary General of the party never became a president after that. Because as we know that when he left office in 2017, he handpicked Lorenzo to be his successor, and then not the Secretary General as others had expected him to do.
So what then does he leave behind in terms of his legacy, especially as he turned the country into a major oil producer, as well as the bad side that you speak of, one of the world's poorest and perhaps corrupt nations?
No, I think that when stability came in Angola, there were, in fact, prospects for the country to enjoy economic growth. Unfortunately, the oil proceeds were not shared evenly. In fact, President Dos Santos' daughter, Isabel, the one he got from a Russian wife, was in fact the main beneficiary, to the extent that she was dubbed as the richest woman on the continent, simply because of the oil proceeds. And the same also applies to his son. But as for him, as an individual, there isn't much that, in fact, I could point out and say he let his nation down. In fact, other people are saying that he was the peacemaker. That is how they labeled him. They said he was the peacemaker by virtue of the fact that he was able to reconcile people from both sides of the political divide. That is including UNITA and, of course, MPLA. So for that, people have credited him for having tried his level best to unite the people of Angola. As to what's going to happen now that he's gone, I'm not too sure, because even though he was no longer president, he still remained influential, and there are people who looked up to him, although, of course, the support enjoyed by MPLA has dwindled over the years for a number of reasons, some of which, of course, could be credited to him when they accused him of allowing corruption, not being corrupt himself, but allowing corruption and also allowing nepotism. And then other people will then say he didn't do well on that front.
Very well. Thank you so much for your time, Professor Bheki Mngomezulu from the Political Science Department at the University of the Western Cape, speaking to the passing of the former Angolan president.